This, you could argue, is one of the most working class Labour cabinets that we've seen for some time. And I think, you're right to say it does give people a on the ground understanding of some of the problems that people who use those public services actually face day in, day out. Now, whether they can actually conjure up some of the money to do something about the problems is another matter.
That's the first full day in number 10. So who's in the new Labour government and what is at the top of their to-do list? We're joined by Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University in London, here in the studio. Thank you for getting up nice and bright and early. So the Cabinet, we were talking about it in our paper review a little bit earlier on. I mean, there's lots of people in the Cabinet who have got kind of real world experience of their brief. I mean, if you look at Bridget Phillipson as education, she was on free school meals. Angela Rayner as housing, she lived in social housing. Wes Streeting had cancer treatment. I mean, there's a lot of real life experience there.
That's right. And actually, it's interesting to look at the backgrounds of these people, not just in terms of their kind of real life experience of that particular brief, but this, you could argue, is one of the most working class Labour cabinets that we've seen for some time. And I think, you're right to say it does give people a on the ground understanding of some of the problems that people who use those public services actually face day in, day out. Now, whether they can actually conjure up some of the money to do something about the problems is another matter.
Absolutely. So particularly, what would you say are the major issues at the top of the to-do list for this new Labour government?
Oh, there are so many, aren't there? I mean, I think for Wes Streeting, solving the doctors' industrial action is really, really crucial. I mean, I understand that is not the main reason why we have very long waiting lists, but it certainly is a big contributory factor. And actually, I just think for the kind of atmosphere within the health service, doing something about that is very, very important. And doing something about it without perhaps getting other groups within the NHS saying, well, the doctors have got this big settlement, what about us? That's going to be a real test, I think, for Wes Streeting.
Absolutely. And I mean, also, we keep being told growth, didn't we, in the campaign? Growth. I mean, the Institute for Fiscal Studies went, not sure these are going to quite add up. Growth takes time, but it's going to be interesting to see from Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer what that plan is for growth from the get-go.
Yes, and there are some things you can do quite quickly. So, for example, if you think about onshore wind, that really is just a change of the kind of licensing rules there. That can be done fairly quickly. Now, of course, we're not going to get onshore wind built, next week simply because Ed Miliband says that you can do it. And the same also, obviously, with housing and infrastructure projects. But I think that liberalisation of the planning regime is going to be a feature of the first 100 days. Are we already talking about that of this Labour government?
Housing you mentioned there, and that is important because lots of people have lots of hopes that Labour can get on top of the housing crisis. But that's not simple. I mean, you've got NIMBYs, you've got planning, it takes time, infrastructure, so many things.
Yeah, I mean, although Labour have won a fair few seats, obviously, in those areas which are a bit not in my backyard, I don't think they're going to have the same problem as the Conservative government had when they had a whole mass of MPs in those areas absolutely refusing because of pressure from their constituents to do anything about it. So I think they will find that easier to do. I mean, famous last words, obviously.
Also, we know that Keir Starmer has already, he said it before the election, but he has now said the Rwanda policy is gone. But that doesn't stop the small boats issue. And we all know, it's the summer. OK, the weather's awful at the moment. But generally, when the summer is here, the waters are calmer, more people try and make those crossings.
Yes, I mean, I honestly think the migration question probably has to be reframed because I think we've had a government and, to some extent a media as well, which has suggested that it is a problem that can somehow be solved, in inverted commas. And it simply can't be. It's a problem that, we will have to manage like other governments, for years to come. People are coming from the global south. It's easier in some ways for them to do now. They have much more access to media, which, shows them what a life looks like in, a more wealthy north. And, really governments all around the world are probably going to have to get together and think about how they manage this. Now, of course, again, that is a long-term, issue. I was going to say solution because it's not a solution, but it's a way of trying to sort of manage that crisis. So the framing of that, I think, is quite important. Obviously, there are things that they can do in terms of, a better returns regime, processing asylum seekers, faster. That would be useful. But then again, once you've processed them, once you've denied some people their claim, how do you actually deport them back to their home countries? That's the difficulty that most people have had.
We had this interview, had a chat, I think it was last week, with John Healey from Labour, saying exactly that. OK, lots of people arrive without documentation. Now, that might be because they lost it, they've never had it, or they've destroyed it. Don't know where they're from. And the Labour solution was, oh, we'll just speak to Europe, they'll take them back. It's like, well, why would, what's the incentive for European countries to take them? We wouldn't take people from Europe, and I think that's going to be a really tricky thing for them. I don't know how much you can tell us about this. What does the first day of government look like? What's Keir Starmer doing today? What's Rachel Reeves doing? What's Angela Rayner doing? Presumably they might have a bit of a hangover, but they need to crack on, don't they?
If they've got any sense, they will be sleeping, I think, right now. I think one of the good things in some ways about the fact that it was always pretty obvious that Labour was going to win this election, despite the fact that we all had to say, who knows whether they will or they won't, is that it's given the civil service an awful lot of time to prepare. And actually, the briefing documents they get from the civil service will be really, really crucial to them. That they will have gone through the manifesto with a fine-tooth comb. They will be presenting ministers with options. Now, obviously, for ministers, it's up to them to decide. The civil service can only advise. I think Labour's also quite lucky because it has got quite a few people in those very key positions who not only have life experience that you talked about, but actually have executive experience in government and perhaps in other areas as well. So I think, for example, Yvette Cooper, she will be able to hit the ground running because she is a very experienced politician.
I just wonder, because you're absolutely right, there's so many that are in the Labour cabinet who don't have that governing experience for obvious reasons, because the Conservatives have been in power for 14 years. I just wonder how much the civil servants kind of pop this down and go, OK, here are your options. And the Labour politicians are going in with kind of these great, like you do when you're enthusiastic, it's a new job, you've got some brilliant big world ideas. How much the civil service turn around and go, nah, it's not going to work?
Well, there is an extent to which that is the case, but you've got to remember as well that there have been transition talks. So it won't be the case that, what these Labour ministers are presented with, comes out of the blue. They will have been able to have discussions with civil servants. They'll probably have already ruled out some of the, slightly madder or more radical options that they might be offered. Obviously, there is the kind of, yes minister view of the civil service that somehow, there's some sort of great blob conspiracy. They've already decided how they're going to outmaneuver this very naive new entrants to their buildings. But I just don't think that is the case anymore. It was good fun. It made a good sitcom, but that's not really how the civil service works.
One final question. Callum mentioned this yesterday, and I think it was a really good point when we were having our meeting yesterday. When there are so many new MPs that Keir Starmer probably doesn't know, that they don't know him, they need to feel included. But it's kind of quite difficult, isn't it, to go around one by one and kind of get to know them all when there's so many?
It is. And, there is a theory that the devil makes work for idle hands to do. In some ways, you do have to, ensure that these people do have something to do. I would have thought what will happen is what most big parliamentary parties do is create kind of backbench commissions, committees or whatever, so people feel involved in a particular area. That, I think, would be very good advice to follow.
Tim, I could speak to you for hours. Thank you so much for coming in. Really good to speak to you. Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University in London.